So this is our inaugural lecture in the McElroy Science and Innovation Center, except that we're not in the McElroy Science and Innovation Center because we had such a good turnout for this lecture. So we moved it here, but we hope if you have any interest in seeing the center that you'll head over there after the lecture for a tour. There will be buses up at the top here if you need some help getting over there. The new building is open, and it's a pretty cool place. It's adding a whole new energy to the school. And we're so glad you could join us. When we started talking about building this building a good 5 years ago, when we were dreaming what would be great at the Science Center, we talked about having a lecture series, bringing in scientists, doctors, people in technology and engineering, and making it a hub of conversations with students, their parents, the community. We wanted to create this energy and start conversations that connected Shady Side Academy and our science building with the community. So this is the first of our inaugural lectures. There will be more of these. And before we get into it, I want to thank our host committee, whose names are up there in huge letters, because they made it happen and helped us get a response and got people out tonight. I also want to thank, we have several science senior administrators here, Amy Nixon, Sophie Lau, head of Shady Side Academy, Sophie Lau, who's here, head of the senior school, Joe Martins, head of the science department, and a number of faculty as well. So thank you for coming and joining us. So our topic tonight is incredibly hot, artificial intelligence. There are 3 talks today alone on AI in Pittsburgh. Which is really funny. It's quite interesting that there are 3 talks just for the public. The Harvard-Yale Club had a lunch. That was who their speaker was, talking about AI. It's even happening at Shady Side Academy. I saw John Wizard here earlier, and he's starting a new course in artificial intelligence on the campus. So that is another harbinger of things that are coming. I wanted to ground this panel discussion that we're going to have in a little bit of history. You know, why AI? Partly because there's a long tradition in Pittsburgh. Pittsburgh's been at the forefront of AI research since the mid-1950s. You may have heard of these 2 researchers, Herb Simon, who won the Nobel Prize in Economics, and his grad student, Alan Newell. They created the first AI computer program in 1956. And it was a program that was engineered to mimic the problem-solving skills of a human. It solved math problems. It proved 38 of the 52 theorems in Principia Mathematica, and it was pretty exciting when they did that. Interestingly, though, Herb Simon was an economist, and he was more interested, he wanted to build machines that could reason, because he wanted to explore how humans made economic decisions. Why do they buy things? How do they buy them? Why do they invest? If a machine could simulate that reasoning, it could help economists understand decision-making. So that was his initial quest and part of what interested him. They were part of a generation of researchers who designed smart machines that could be programmed to use what was called symbolic reasoning, and I'm not going to load you down with defining it at this point, but we may get to that, to do useful work such as translating languages, making logistic plans, problem solving, and playing chess. A lot of the early symbolic reasoning applications were chess games. But that created a burst of enthusiasm for expert systems that did specific tasks in AI. And there were a number of AI companies founded in the 80s that's when it began. But then there was disappointment. Because while these symbolic reasoning machines could do specific tasks, such as play chess, they could not scale up to do really useful world tasks, such as helping FedEx or UPS figure out where to put their distribution centers and how best to make sure all their packages got where they needed to go, or capture the expertise in medical decision making. So there was what was called an AI winter, a period when people felt that there was more promise than actual results. And one of the things tonight we're going to talk about is why this excitement now is different from that. Fortunately, different models of reasoning were also being developed. So while symbolic reasoning was hitting some limits, other researchers were inspired by looking at the actual brain for models of how to make machines that could reason. And they looked at neural networks in the brain, which are those, if you think of each brain cell, it's a neuron. They're all interconnected in these vast networks where signals rush across the brain, and when you're doing different tasks, different parts of the brain light up, where your brain is processing information and making it happen. So this was a great inspiration to researchers who could then use the power of this model to create a sort of neural architecture in which they could design many tiny processors like the neurons and link them in networks. And then they could put signals in and train up these networks. And I'm not going to try to define all that now in an introduction, but these networks were particularly good with all the different processors at classifying stuff and pattern matching. You could show them a picture of a cat or a stop sign and train them to recognize which one was the cat and which was the stop sign. So these advances have led to a burst of research. And in the past 15 years, the networks were able to be scaled up to take on really complex tasks and problems, such as identifying faces in a crowd. We'd all know about self-driving cars, helping them see and navigate the landscape. Training Siri or Alexa to recognize speech, training Watson to play Jeopardy. These are just some of the ones you might have heard about. Major corporations are investing in this. Google and Microsoft and IBM work extensively in these areas, and they're hiring a lot of AI researchers. But the applications and the work goes well beyond people just interested in computer science. There are a lot of applications across a wide range of fields. They're helping investors buy and trade stocks. They're helping doctors diagnose disease. Generals deploy their troops and resources in battlefields. You know, how best to do that. Thomas Sandholm, one of our speakers, will talk about algorithms he used to match kidney donors with people who need to get kidneys around the world. Netflix predict what TV shows you want to watch or movies. So investment is coming from many areas as well. It's happening in Pittsburgh. It's happening at the regional level with venture capital sources, but also governments. I just read that China has invested $10 billion in AI, and it has a horizon that goes to 2030. France is investing, Canada's investing. This is a really strategic area. So all this is exciting, but it also raises some concerns about the power of these smart machines, and maybe we'll get into that in our discussion. So just that was a little bit of context. Now I'm going to get us started and introduce our speakers. And then once I introduce them, we're going to go to questions that we have, and then I hope I can open up to audience questions. So I'm going to start on our far left. I'm going to go with this against the alphabet. I'm going to start with Thomas Sandholm, is a renowned AI researcher and successful AI entrepreneur. He's a professor in the computer science department at CMU, where he's founder and director of the Electronic Marketplaces Laboratory, and he's the founder, president, and CEO of at least 3 different companies, including one called CombinedNet, which you may have heard of. According to a recent article in Pittsburgh Magazine, his accomplishments in artificial intelligence have benefited businesses, security industries, and kidney transplantation. Last year, he ranked 9th most influential artificial intelligence scholar in the world. I'm not sure where 9 comes in versus 10 or 8, but according to this research site A-Miner, which also uses algorithms to track citations of scholars' work, which I think is kind of funny. But particularly cool is that he's also developed leading algorithms for games. His team is the current 2-time world champion in computer heads-up, no-limit Texas Hold'em poker. And Liberatus, which they worked on, or Liberatus, became the first and only AI to beat top humans at that game. He has many honors, but one of the most important is he's the parent of Sophia Sandholm in the middle school. So he's a parent here. I'm going to ask you the first question, and then I'm going to introduce the next speakers and ask them that as well, because I think if we try to do all the introductions, we'll get lost in that. So the first question is, tell us 3 of your favorite applications in AI, so we can get a sense of where they are, you know, the range of applications.
Oh, that's a...
And a little bit about what you do, what your projects are.
Okay, well, that's a tough one. Of my own applications, I like the kidney exchange, which is some pro bono work we're doing. We run the nationwide kidney exchange for UNOS, so every week our software makes a transplant plan for 69% of the transplant centers in the US together. So that's one. I also like this strategic reasoning, which is game theoretic reasoning in imperfect information settings. And that's something which is newer, and we just reached superhuman level at that a year and a half ago. And now we're doing a lot of applications of that into various things in the world. Combinatorial auctions. We introduced large-scale combinatorial auctions into sourcing, where bidders can bid on combinations of items and put in various types of side constraints to represent business rules and so on. And we fielded 800 of those marketplaces, totaling $60 billion before we sold the company in 2010. So I think those are my favorite of what I've done, but there are just so many AI applications out there in the world that ranging from, you know, just business things to making the world a better place, also art. Music is getting there very quickly. and so on. So it's just hard to pick one
I
out
know.
of 1,000 applications that I like.
Can you guys all hear him okay, or is it sound all right? Just making sure. So I'm going to next introduce Dr. Shiv Rao, who is an alum. He went to Shady Side Academy. He was here in middle school and senior school, class of '97. He is a cardiologist and executive vice president who oversees provider interface. I'm sorry, I'm not reading that right. Let me get that exactly right. He's executive vice president at UPMC Enterprises. That's what his title is. He's combined his cardiovascular training, research, and technology interests to become one of UPMC's leading digital health strategists. He served as the vice president of clinical innovation strategy before he became executive vice president. He is part of a team that aims to change healthcare by improving quality while lowering costs through capital investments, including mainly in AI, and particularly in imaging, pathology, radiology. He can talk about that. He took a leave recently to start a new company with some CMU professors in artificial intelligence called abridge.ai, and that's using speech, voice, and text in healthcare, AI to work with that. So Shiv, tell us what you think are some exciting applications and maybe something you're working on.
Yeah, so Thomas mentioned there's just so many applications out there. I think at night when I'm just perusing archive articles, I think the things that really catch my eye are in the arts field. I'm really interested in music, and there's so much happening with sound right now that is really like mind-blowing. Being able to have algorithms create new music that actually, in some cases, outperforms human-generated music in terms of testing with human subjects and whatnot. But I think you sort of set the table in terms of my role as a cardiologist working at the interface of technology and healthcare. The mission really that I focus most of my time on is trying to create technologies that can assist, augment, and automate aspects of healthcare delivery to improve experiences for the people who really matter, for patients and for people who provide care. And so from that perspective, we have a thesis that a lot of medical decision making is actually pattern matching. And if it is pattern matching, then technologies, machine learning powered technologies, are probably in a really good spot over the next 5 to 10 years to do that, to actually accomplish, create incredible impact in terms of being able to assist and augment aspects of care. So that ranges from, there was a really exciting paper from Google Research that came out a couple years ago in relation to machine learning being able to outperform humans in diagnosing diabetic retinopathy. That's really, that can be world-changing from the perspective of being able to deploy systems at scale across the world and third world countries, and to be able to diagnose diabetes a lot sooner than we could before. There's a lot of really interesting applications for machine learning in beyond imaging, I think, in drug discovery. And so there's a company out there that's come up with a couple really interesting hypotheses around drugs that could tackle Ebola. But where I'm focused is these days is really around speech, voice, and text, and that's because of a thesis we have that healthcare at the end of the day is local and healthcare is human, and upstream of all of these really fancy diagnostics and therapeutics, upstream of like the baby aspirin and upstream of also the billion-dollar immunotherapy, is a conversation that happened between a care provider and a care consumer. And it could be happening over the phone, it could be happening in an urgent care or in a minute clinic or an outpatient hospital room or an inpatient hospital room. But if we could capture those conversations, but more importantly maybe extract information that can be really useful for both sides of that value chain, then we have a chance maybe of clean sheeting what the healthcare delivery experience looks like. And we have a chance maybe to just, bring healthcare into the paradigm we live in our day-to-day lives in terms of having these amazing experiences being delivered to us from really big technology companies. We're not really quite there yet with healthcare, but I think we'll get there pretty quickly now.
So I'm going to try to just have my voice, you can hear me because I can't hear them over there. That's okay. Katerina Frankiadaki, Kiadaki.
Yes.
Yeah, well, yeah, she'll tell it to you as well, so we have it. Is an assistant professor in the machine learning department at Carnegie Mellon University, who also worked at Google Research in Mountain View, working with their video group. She's interested in building machines that understand the stories that videos portray, and in using videos to teach machines about the world. Her goal is to build a machine that understands movie plots, and it has good taste, which refers Ingrid Bergman to some more thrillers according to her website. What caught my eye about her bio as well is that she helped organize an A14 all-summer school to expose rising juniors in AI and to the good that AI can do in the world. So I thought maybe you could talk a little bit about applications you like, and then at some point we should get to what you think students can be doing or thinking about to use AI.
Yes, sounds good. So the applications, I'm not sure if you mean applications that have already happened or what I dream about that I will achieve in my lifetime.
One of each.
Sure. So one application that I found very compelling from my colleagues in the Robotics Institute was using AI to combat human trafficking. What they did is they used newspapers and images in newspapers and smart computer vision techniques to figure out each image from which hotel comes from, and to try to track down these images, where they were taken, when the image was taken, and from where it was taken. And right now, this application is being used by American police, so I know that. So this is super, super exciting. I mean, I work in computer vision. Essentially, we're trying to come up with methods that a machine can understand what's happening, can understand human activity from images and videos. So our, let's say, goal, what we hope eventually to achieve, is automated surveillance. Imagine you have your grandmother or grandfather, and you know, he's aging. You would like to have cameras, and there are excellent, super cheap cameras right now you can put in your house. In fact, my house has 5 cameras right now because I have a baby. And ideally, we want to automate surveillance from these cameras to tell you, oh, your grandmother is having a problem, or your baby stopped breathing, or your baby turned upside down, right? So these simple things, I think they are within reach in the next few years, okay? Now, the long-term goal would be how can we build a robotic agent that is so very much aware of his environment and can see so well and can hear so well that can operate among humans with safety, can even be an artificial babysitter to take care of babies and help parents. So that would be, you know, our long-term goal in, you know, robotics and machine learning, let's say.
Mothers would love that.
Yes, right.
That's great. So our next speaker is Evan Adams, who many of you know already. He's a class of '87, and he's a former member of the board here at Shady Side Academy. He's vice president of growth and partnerships at Legal Sifter, which is a company he will tell you about that uses AI and legal documents. And Evan joined Legal Sifter in December 2015 after 20 years of entrepreneurial positions in growth, partnership, strategy, and leadership in the Pittsburgh region. He started his career by running his own retail business for 6 years before joining Free Markets for another 5 years. He served on several boards in the local area and launched Bayard Capital Partners, a private equity search firm. So he can maybe also talk to us about funding AI. He earned a master's in business administration, MBA in entrepreneurship, marketing, and organizational behavior from the Temper School of Business at Carnegie Mellon University. And he also has children in the middle school and junior school.
Just junior.
Just junior, yeah. Okay. That's great.
Thank you. Thank you.
You know what the drill is.
Yeah, thank you. And thank you to Shady Side Academy for facilitating this really important community discussion. So personally, I'm just excited when Gmail finishes my sentences for me. So I'm kind of a pragmatist, and I think those kind of applications of AI are pretty cool. But you know, the thing that attracted me to Legal Sifter, and the thing that gets me excited about AI, broadly speaking, is the ability of this technology to democratize access to services for humanity. One of the problems that we have in the world, especially in the United States, where 1% of the population owns 40% of the wealth, is that there's a massive portion of our society that really don't have great access to education and healthcare and legal services. And that's a big problem. And AI has the potential to change that. at Legal Sifter, we use AI, specifically machine learning and natural language processing, to read contracts and provide advice. So, you know, most people, when we talk about using technology to change the way that legal services are delivered, most people are excited about that because they realize that legal services are very expensive today. And if we can use technology to disseminate that information more broadly at a lower price point, then that's a good thing. And I think the same thing applies for education. I read a great article the other day about using AI to advance literacy on a global basis. I mean, that's really powerful. Or AI to be able to diagnose cancer more effectively in countries where high quality medical care really isn't available to most people. So those are the kind of things I'm particularly excited about, and looking forward to the rest of the discussion.
Yeah, so the first question I'm going to start with is, tell us some really key areas of research investment right now. What are some really exciting areas? And I don't need all of you to answer this, but a couple of you maybe talk about what you think are really hot areas at the moment. Maybe Thomas, you start with that.
Okay, so I don't want to speak for all of AI. I'll just mention some examples. So one of the areas that's kind of already there and is machine learning. And about maybe 25 years ago, it got so good that, you know, it really was producing good results and had impressive applications. But in the last 10 years, it has really taken off at the level where it's in many cases superhuman and is widely applied. Now, when it comes to the leading technique in machine learning, which is called deep learning, leading in terms of accuracy and so forth, that's a kind of a black box approach, and there's exciting research going on there on how do you actually figure out how much can those systems be wrong, how much can they be fooled, and so on. So that's kind of one, maybe if you had to pick one of the single hottest areas of AI, that would be it. In my own research, we're very excited about these imperfect information game solving things. So being able to actually deal with worlds where you have one or more adversaries playing against you, where you have private information, they have private information. You have to think about what do their actions signal to you about their private information. What are your actions signal to them about your private information and all that. Both of these are active areas of investment, but the latter thing is much kind of newer, and we just reached superhuman level just last year. So it's very different levels of fielding and maturity so far there. Yeah.
So one follow-up on that is, you're interested in poker, we have other machines that play games, but it's not so much the game. You're doing that to understand the problem solving and the adversarial relationship.
Yeah, exactly. These are not algorithms for poker. It just happens that Heads Up No Limit Texas Hold'em is the main benchmark that the AI community has settled on. So these are algorithms for general imperfect information games. So think about negotiation, strategic pricing, many areas of trading. We're looking at various military applications as well, and so forth. So really, if you think about most decision making in the world is imperfect information games. It's games because you're not the only player. Other people's actions affect what you should do. And secondly, it's imperfect information. So when you have to decide on something, you don't have all of the pieces nicely lined up or on a chessboard or go board. You actually have to do it under imperfect information. And to make things worse, imperfect information that some of the others know.
Somebody else want to talk about what else is hot right now in AI that you're thinking of? Yeah, Patrick.
I mean, self-driving cars are hot. There's a lot of investment on self-driving cars, lots of companies, lots of startups. Other area is, for example, smart homes and smart home assistants. Alexa, Google, every company has its own, and how you can combine this little machine with controlling the whole house and automatize it. Mobile home assistants, how we can make the mobile phones even more intelligent, and teaching people how to dance, how to do gym, how all this nice stuff. Intelligent fridge. I think it's going to be so that keeps track of what you have, what you don't have, tells, you know, all these smart how to say, combining computer vision and then internet, etc., that to communicate information, right? I think all these are within reach with the current technology we have. Healthcare is, of course, due to the interest, of course, and a topic that I think is starting and again is going to have a lot of investment is AI for financial services. Okay, how can we use AI technology to trade? Okay, and there is, I think, the first workshop for AI for finance in NIPS this year. NIPS is like the main machine learning conference in December. So I think this also is going to, for good or bad reasons, also is going to boom.
Well, I wanted to say that if you look at the statistics, there was a great report that McKinsey did maybe about a year and a half ago. And the vast majority of applications of AI today, at least in the business world, are focused on financial services, technology businesses, so on the coasts primarily, and in the automotive industry. So that's where the bulk of the investment is today in this type of technology from a business perspective. You know, my hope is that very quickly, businesses of all kinds, some more traditional businesses, start to adopt this type of technology and see the potential not only in internal productivity, but also in new products that address new existing customer needs, but in a novel way.
So what about in Pittsburgh? Not to be too local, but we live here. How is it changing our landscape and what we're doing? You know, are there companies that come to mind, or is it changing government or education, or, you know, can any of you think of ways? I think we should in medicine. You know, what are you seeing, what you're doing in your investment for UPSC?
Yeah, I think Pittsburgh's special in the sense that UPMC is an incredibly large hospital system, and it's one of a kind in the sense that it's academic. It also has a payer-provider system. And so there's that integrated delivery network story where you've got the payer angle, the insurance angle, you also have the clinical data and the doctors, and then you've got the academic.
Just a little bit.
Sure, yeah, and then you also have the academic angle with the medical school. And that leads to lots of data. And so I think it was 3-4 years ago, our CEO and the president of Carnegie Mellon came together, and UPMC made a pretty significant investment into the machine learning department at Carnegie Mellon, and the idea was to kind of leverage this unfair advantage that we have in this region from a healthcare perspective, and to try and figure out how to bring the barriers to entry down. Because I think, to your point, one of the issues in healthcare is that the barriers to entry have been just as high as the barriers to exit in terms of trying to create value, trying to innovate. And so there's a lot of companies, legacy companies, if you will, that are stuck in between those walls, and they're doing just fine without innovating really over the last 10 years. And so one aspect of what can happen in Pittsburgh, and I think what's starting to happen, is that a large hospital system can bring the barriers to entry down, invite innovators from anywhere really, give them access to data, this really unfair advantage, and then give them access to people, whether it's patients or physicians, and then allow them to figure out how to build a new experience leveraging technologies like machine learning. And so we're seeing a lot of, I think we're starting to see healthcare startups pop up in the area, and I think that's to some extent by design.
Are they mostly about diagnosis and things like, you know, pathology and things like that, or are they about communication tools and information for doctors? And what are the kinds of ways you see this?
Yeah, absolutely. It's been all of the above. I think the general takeaway that we're seeing is that the opportunities to assist with machine learning are lower hanging than the opportunities to automate. And so from like an assistance perspective, there are a lot of back office operations in a hospital, for example, from a supply chain perspective, or in terms of optimizing throughput through a cardiac MRI lab. There's a lot of opportunities to optimize, and that doesn't necessarily have the same regulatory hurdles or overhead attached to it because it's not life or death. And I think from a research perspective, a little bit lower in the stack, if you will, there's a lot of really interesting research going on around like the diagnostics and maybe even like on the therapeutic side. But that's a little bit further away from actual translation at the bedside.
How about you? Want to get in Pittsburgh?
Me? So this is one of my favorite subjects, so I could speak a long time on it, but I won't. So to me, when I think about AI and the impact on Pittsburgh, I feel like that this is the most profound economic opportunity of all of our lifetimes, right? Carnegie Mellon, specifically the School of Computer Science, it represents this vast natural resource that would be analogous to coal and oil and waterways in this region, and we really have a great chance to be a world leader in this space, because we have this resource that is incredibly finite in capacity, but is the most highly sought after commodity in the world, which is the graduates of the School of Computer Science and the professors of the School of Computer Science at CMU. So let's not, don't take this opportunity lightly. I mean, there's a reason why Google and Uber and Apple and Facebook and Autodesk and Disney and Amazon and Intel and Ford and Pentium and LegalSifter, et cetera, are here, right? I mean, there's a reason why, and there's a reason why Google's here, because Andrew Moore was here, and so that's really cool stuff. And it's really fun for those of you that have raised money on this. It's so cool to go out to the Bay Area and to say you're a startup in Pittsburgh, and people are like, oh, okay, whatever. And then you say, well, I'm an AI startup in Pittsburgh out of Carnegie Mellon, and people listen, and they're very interested in what you're doing. So, Facebook's announcement the other day about opening an office in the Strip District, Apple's already there, Argo's already there, Uber's already there. I mean, it's really an incredible time. So, I think it's just a super fun thing to be a part of. And I would encourage everybody to think about how they can engage in that.
Well, my next question is related to that. And what could students do now to prepare, not just the kids, certainly a computer science or an engineering degree can move in that direction. Those are the more traditional paths to move in that direction, and that's exciting. What can kids do in those areas, but also beyond that? What are some things that would be opportunities or things that students could do? And maybe Katrina can start with that, because she's involved with training college juniors. It's a little older,
Right.
but how they can think about using AI to make the world a better place, which has a nice sound to it. Yeah.
Yes, so we organized a 3-week summer school called AI for All. AI for All is in fact a national initiative. There are AI for All summer camps in Stanford, Berkeley, Princeton, and other universities. The goal of this summer camp was to attract students from unprivileged schools, and students from minorities like women or Hispanic, African American, and expose them to AI and show them that, yes, you can be part of this, okay? So we train them, we show them very basic machine learning techniques throughout these 3 weeks. They also had the opportunity to code themselves, so the first few days is very basic programming exercises, okay? And at the same time, CMU professors and PhD students go and talk about their passion and show their state-of-the-art research and try to get them exciting. And indeed, at the end of the summer camp, all of them said that they want to pursue AI. So this is fantastic. Yes, I'm not sure what you mean, how students from other fields, let's say humanities, okay, can they do to use AI? I would say they need to collaborate with some people that work with data, right? Data science, machine learning people, and go and say, look, I have this particular problem, I have this data, and I want to automate this process. And in fact, it's interesting because just today I had a meeting with a colleague from Heinz College who discussed about how can we use AI for investigating child abuse. So the government service receives 400,000 calls per year reporting child abuse in a neighboring house. So the government has limited resources. So how can we use machine learning techniques and use the data that the investigator collects when it visits that house, pictures, videos, conversation with the people, okay, and try to evaluate if indeed there is abuse. How can automatically convert all this experience, right, multimodal experience, into notes and summaries so that we automate the human effort. So as you see, this requires collaboration both from the technical people and the people that actually do this job and need to collect the data, because half of the thing is data and half of the thing is using it, right? So collecting the data is as hard as, right.
That's so cool. I didn't want to cut you off. It sounds like you're saying being able to work with data, having programming skills, these are going to be important if you're in the humanities or any field now, too. I think those are going to be important tools for psychology or any kinds of...
I think you're trying to hint that, you need to be able to program even if you are in humanities. Potentially, to do interesting and innovative things, that would definitely be very, very helpful, right?
Journalism. Analyzing the data, right. So anybody else want to address that? What should students be doing to prepare for this AI world we're moving into?
Yeah, I'd love to. There's so many different dimensions to this and like what's coming. I think there's dimensions related to policy, there's ethics, there's like the legal, there's regulatory, there's the business, there's the design, and then there's obviously like the hardcore basic science and the technical aspects. And so I think there's so many different vectors that people can get involved in. IDEO, which is like a design agency, has who invented, I think, like the mouse and like came up with any number of innovations since then. But they have this thing about what they look for when they're the phenotype of a person that they look for when they hire or when they recruit. And they say that they look for T-shaped people. So people who are really, really deep in one area but can cross the T with another discipline. And I think the next paradigm is not just being T-shaped, it's almost resembling like a hashtag, where you want to be really, really multidisciplinary. You want to be like an interdisciplinary thinker who can create really, really fast, tight feedback loops within your own brain, where you have enough, say you're a computer scientist, you're obviously very deep in one area, but if you have a little bit of ethics or a little bit of entrepreneurial sort of spirit or a little bit of business on top of that or a little bit of something else, then you're exponentially more valuable or exponentially more capable of maybe seeing things that other people can't see and being creative. So I think from that perspective, this isn't the way I see it, at least. I don't think everyone needs to necessarily be a computer scientist to create a whole bunch of value in like a machine learning or AI paradigm. I do think people need to be broad and need to also figure out where they want to be deep. But like to totally get liberal artsy, like Rainer Maria Rilke has like a quote where he says, "Don't seek answers, seek questions." And I think from a high school perspective, if I could go back, I would just figure out exactly what questions I'm most interested in and just pursue them as much as I possibly can, whether that is in history or arts or in painting or in music. And then also figure out whether or not I want to cross that, whatever my deep sort of line is, with a T of data science or computer science, because that's, I think, being able to cross that T, you don't need to necessarily be really, really deep as a PhD computer scientist, I think, but being able to cross the T with enough to be dangerous, I think is going to become really important.
Yeah, so I think that the core sciences are something that's good for middle schoolers and high schoolers to learn, because that's like really impossible to learn later. So that's a good base, and then from there you can go in a lot of different directions. I also like the idea of computational thinking, which was actually a topic that Janet Wing, one of my ex-colleagues, actually came up with that notion, and now I see that in schools, like including Shady Side Academy here, where they talk about computational thinking, how it's not necessarily programming, it's like everything is taught from a computer science perspective, whether it's biology or whatever. And I think that's very powerful, and I'm very impressed how quickly even that term has just transcended into the early education stages. One thing that I really like is to try to spur creativity in kids. So instead of saying, okay, well, here's how you do something, and now do the same thing that 1,000 or 1,000,000 kids have done before, and oh yeah, you did it too, so here's a good grade. More kind of saying, okay, well, can you imagine something that would be nice if it were around? Just anything. And then, can you build it? How would you build it? And go from there.
Yeah.
We talked about impact in Pittsburgh. So one more thing in Pittsburgh, do we have the human capital here and beyond to commercialize AI in Pittsburgh? This has been an issue with startups. You know, Silicon Valley, lots of venture capital. Do we have that in Pittsburgh? We've got a lot of great technology and science coming out of this area. We've got UPMC, lots of ideas. Do we have the capital?
Yes.
What about the business end of it?
Yes, we do. So I've never in my startups seen any problems with that. And we have, well, in my first company, we raised 55 million and we did it all from the coasts. So yes, the Sand Hill Road capitalists, venture capitalists are reluctant to invest in a place where they can't drive if they have to go on a plane, but they will do it if the thing is promising enough. And so I don't think that's a problem. And
They have a self-driving car, right?
yeah, and also I think the strongest startups are actually built without venture capital. I think that in many situations you can actually build things off of customer revenues and it keeps things real. So I think that very much it can be done, and AI startups are more successful in Pittsburgh now in both models. So like I'm doing bootstrap startups right now, but on the other extreme we have like Argo.ai that raises $1 billion in one round. So it's a whole spectrum and it works at both ends.
Yeah, I mean, I don't think money is an issue in this market. Great ideas find money, or money finds great ideas. And I think the venture capital community, I mean, Pentum has raised $100 million, and so I think it's totally doable here. I actually think that the thing that we lack here, more than the data science capability and the computer science capability, is the business acumen. There's been such a massive brain drain in this region for so many years, and many of the companies that are here have become complacent in terms of investing in their employees, and as a result, we don't have some of the other skills that are so critical to building any business, like marketing and sales and general leadership and human resources and finance. And that's a challenge. That's a challenge in this market. I think data science is less of a challenge because many startups have a direct pipeline into Carnegie Mellon.
An important opportunity, perhaps, right?
Mm-hmm.
And having CEOs that can help run these companies, have business acumen.
Yeah, I want to actually I want to mention something on the previous question. If you think about the skill set that's really required in a world where so many routine cognitive tasks are going to be automated, it's the kind of things that people do really, really well, like be compassionate and be creative and communicate in a really thoughtful way. There's a gentleman named Kai-Fu Lee, who's a Carnegie Mellon PhD. He's ran Google China. He's a major venture capitalist. He just wrote a book that's on the New York Times bestseller list called AI Superpowers, talking about China and the United States kind of combating for that title. And he really talks about this and the importance of teaching these soft skills that, frankly, were somewhat abandoned by business and to focus on more technical skills, but the kind of traditional liberal arts things that a place like Shady Side has always been great at are so important when building companies in this space. So
Yeah.
I think that's a real opportunity.
Just to piggyback on that, there was a report out of Oxford, I think 2 or 3 years ago, that tried to paint a picture of like what automation will look like in the future and which jobs are probably going to get automated the quickest and which will take longer. But the bottom line of that report really was that jobs that involve a lot of social intelligence and creativity are going to be the hardest to automate. And I think in general, like from a software development perspective, people talk about how value moves up the stack. So if you think about a stack, at the bottom of the stack you have like core infrastructure, in the middle maybe you have analytics, and maybe at the top you have user experiences, what it feels like to use Snapchat or Instagram. And right now, like when you think about Instagram or Snapchat, they're completely competing, well, for the most part, on user experiences. What is, trying to make something cheaper, better, faster. And maybe technology at the end of the day is about creating things, experiences that are cheaper, better, faster. It's about commoditization. But all of us, I think, want to live at the top of the stack. And I think what technology is doing and what ML enables us increasingly to do is to be more creative. And I think that's what's so exciting, why I led off with sort of music and ML and what that's enabling, what that's going to enable a new generation of musicians to do is just going to be incredibly mind-blowing, because you will still have humans creating music, but I think they'll have these ML-powered tools to create the music with, and it'll just look and feel different.
That's so cool. So this is my last question, and I hope we can take a question or two from the audience, and that is the challenges. A lot of people have a lot of fear about machines taking over the world. It's an ancient fear. It's been there for a long time. I've been told that these AI systems usually are specific tasks. There's not sort of a general how, like in the old movie 2001: A Space Odyssey, that can do everything and anything and mimic everything that a human does. They're very specific, generally speaking. Can you talk a little bit to people's fears about AI? Either the intrusiveness, loss of privacy, or just a little bit, what are some of the challenges we're facing that need to be worked through? I don't want to be all panacea here.
Well, I think that one is the Terminator thing, killer robots. That's like the number one misconception. Another thing is what's called artificial general intelligence, or AGI. So there are actually serious companies actually just got back from the World Congress on AI, where I gave a keynote, and the biggest tech company in China thinks that there's going to be AGI in a few years. So this is just, to me, it is just totally crazy. First of all, I mean, technology-wise, we are way far from that. And the second is that more importantly, there is no demand for that. So I use this metaphor of a saw and a hammer. Yeah, you can go out and buy a saw because it's a useful tool and people buy it. There are hammers, it's a useful tool, people buy it. But nobody buys a saw hammer, and that's why there are no saw hammers. So it's kind of the same thing with artificial general intelligence, is that AI is a helpful tool in many different applications, and different kinds of AI techniques are helpful in different applications. And this idea of suddenly there being, well, even ever, there being artificial general intelligence, I'm kind of very skeptical about that, and that's not necessarily coming from the AI researchers. That's coming maybe more from kind of populists and movies and so forth.
Does anybody else want to take that on?
Yeah, so sure. So movies have definitely influenced people to think about this. I don't think this is an issue. There are other issues, though, that are being raised with AI. The simplest that we can all think is, what if our AI algorithm makes a mistake? Okay, and it is totally possible this to happen, and things can happen with self-driving cars already. The second is privacy. I can definitely say that companies do take privacy very, very seriously, and yes, and there are many, many research efforts right now of how we can, use computer vision algorithms, but at the same time, without the researcher knowing what are the faces in the picture, how can the machine detect, but at the same time transform the picture so that the faces are unrecognizable? Does this make sense? Another thing that is fake news. So right now we can create any image we want and make it look so real. So and we can generate speech, and so anything can be generated and shown to be real. Does this make sense? So fake news is an issue, I would say. These type of challenges, I think, are real, right? Do you understand them?
Anybody else want to talk about that for other questions?
Yeah, I mean, I think we're all machine learning bulls, but to just sort of be provocative, there's Andrew Yang was here last week or the week before for the Thrival conference, and he was here a couple years ago too, and now and his story now is that he wants to run for president as a Democrat in 2020. And the main pitch, really, that he's making is that it can be summarized in like one line: the robots are coming, and not only are they coming, but they've already been here, and we are already seeing the effects of automation. So if he was here, I think he would talk about how across Wisconsin, Pennsylvania, across Ohio, 4.5 million jobs in the manufacturing industry were automated, and pre the last election, and that had everything to do with those results. And automation is just going to continue. And I think he would say that we don't necessarily know what those new jobs are going to look like in an ML paradigm. I think everyone on this panel will probably say that they're going to pop up, and we're going to have an entirely new industry, but we don't know what they're going to look like. And I think he would say that we are on track for something that will look exponentially worse than the Great Depression if we don't get ahead of this quickly from a policy perspective. And a part of the policies that I think he's pushing is from a privacy and security perspective, that these really, really big tech companies that own so much of our data have controlled so much of our lives from that perspective that they start paying a tax. And that this could subsidize something like a universal basic income. But I think there's just so much, and it's going to be really interesting to see what the next 5 to 10 years look like, because even if you think about self-driving cars, I've seen a statistic where there's like 3.5 million truck drivers in the United States, and that truck drivers are that's the most common 6-figure salary in America. And if we're going to automate that job away, what do those truck drivers do? Because the skills that they have, are they really, really high? The skills that they've kind of built up driving trucks in the creativity and social intelligence sort of buckets, are they high enough that they could become care managers in a nursing home? And I think he would argue that they're not, and that's what we have to figure out how to deal with.
Real challenges. Evan, did you want to add it too?
Yeah, to me, one of the biggest challenges around AI is just the fact that our governments are completely out to lunch on this stuff. I mean, they're not addressing the reality of this technology, both in terms of how it's regulated, but also the impact that it's going to have on the economy. And they, continue to talk about things that are essentially irrelevant, and not focus on things that are going to actually have a really fundamental impact on all of our lives. So I think the best example of this was during the presidential race. There was a 60 Minutes piece about AI in Carnegie Mellon right before one of the presidential debates. And it was just hilarious, the juxtaposition between this amazing story about Pittsburgh and Carnegie Mellon and all of the changes that could be coming online, and then watching the presidential debate and how and what they were focused on. So I think, as citizens, right, we need to be pushing our governments to think differently about these issues and to try to catch up, because it's important stuff.
Yeah, I won't talk about hand size. But I think that's very important. And the U.S. is grossly underinvesting in AI compared to China. And AI is a kind of a winner-take-all business for businesses. It's a winner-take-all business for people, and it's a winner-take-all business for nations. So if we're really worried about the Great Depression-like thing, it's really the opposite of investing in AI and becoming successful in AI. It's really underinvesting in AI, not becoming successful AI, and being completely left in the dust.
Well, on that chipper note, let's open it up to questions. Are there any audience questions? I see one right over there. Yeah.
This question isn't for anyone specifically, although I think maybe Dr. Rao or Dr. Santo may have something to say on it. So this was kind of touched on a little bit in some of the earlier questions. For someone who's in high school right now, who lives in Pittsburgh, who's interested in artificial intelligence or machine learning, data science, technology in general, these industries, what do you think the best way is for them to take advantage of the opportunities in this region and in the growing field for the company?
Well, I think that this is not a large-scale solution, but as an individual, I would say that if you could go do an internship for a summer at CMU in one of the AI labs, that would be great. I would do that in a heartbeat. Of course, there's a very finite capacity there, but if you can do that, I think that would be great.
And if you can't get that spot, then there's so much online anymore, and there are meetups, there's people getting together, there are hackathons, there's people you can meet to learn from. This is a very distinguished panel, and so from a computer science perspective, I'm not on the same map at all as anyone else here, but what I did to just become, a layman, like from a machine learning perspective, was to just do a couple Coursera courses. And there's also a fast.ai course that was really useful for me to just be able to build very basic models, to just get a mental model of what this stuff looks like. So in case you can't get that awesome gig at the AI lab, then I think there's so many different things you can do to get smart on this stuff these days.
You could also, if you know the program, you could probably get some sort of internship opportunity in one of the Pittsburgh companies that do AI.
Yeah, there's a couple. There's a few on this panel right now.
The other thing I would say is that there's a great Harvard Business Review article in this month's Harvard Business Review by a gentleman named Risto. I think you're connected to him on LinkedIn, Thomas, so you'll know how to pronounce his name. But Risto Siilasmaa. Yeah, so he's the chairman of Nokia. And the entire article is about how he knew absolutely nothing about AI. He felt like he was doing his company a huge disservice. And he spent like 6 months engaging in AI, taking courses, learning as much as he could so that he could share that knowledge with Nokia. And there's a great article from The Atlantic about Henry Kissinger doing the exact same thing. So I think what we're seeing in the world is that people who are smart and continuous learners are gravitating to this field, regardless of whether or not they're data scientists, and they're learning as much as they can and thinking about how they can apply that knowledge to their daily lives.
Any other question? Take up there.
I think it's very related to what you said. Now, we being in business, there's a lot of companies who come to us and say, hey, this is AI based, right? You just need to wait for a few months and then the data will, there'll be machine learning and will do the right things, right? How do I determine whether they're using the right algorithms, right? Will that be applicable? How do I say this is better than that, even before I get into that space?
You mean in evaluating vendors or becoming one yourself?
Pretty much evaluating vendor, at least to start.
Oh, that is so difficult. Because everybody says they have optimization and they have AI and cryptocurrencies, so whatever, all of the hot things. That's very difficult. I think if you can ask for performance metrics, that's always good. That's very hard to get bake-offs because the weaker companies don't want to engage in bake-offs. You could look at the technical advisory boards and the founders, how serious they are. I would say that's probably the best.
I think it's also important when you're evaluating vendors is to realize that, and there's a great video from Andreessen Horowitz on this. When you're evaluating AI vendors, don't just look at the AI, because the AI is only one small component of the overall solution that they're likely presenting to you. And it may be kind of the engine that drives the solution, but it's unlikely to be the aspect of the solution that ultimately keeps you, hooks you, and keeps you as a customer.
Any question? I think I saw one right there. Yeah.
So I'm going to ask the blue and yellow elephant in the room question. Twice this evening, we have asked students what they can do to prepare. Have we asked the learning institutions what they can do to prepare? So one of the biggest criteria of Amazon's RFP was talent pipeline, human capital. Do we have the human capital starting in preschool all the way through your students? And how do we create those T-shaped individuals when our curricula is not? There are big walls between liberal arts and technology, between business and science. So then how do we knock those walls down so the students don't ask how, but when?
So teaching, education. What can we be doing? Are there models out there? I do see it happening in Shady Side Academy. I see it, it's happening. But we're talking about schools everywhere. And it's hashtag kids, right? Are there any exciting initiatives? I mean, you're working with college students, but do you know anything that's...
So actually, this is interesting what you're saying. It's related also to what we discussed earlier, right, about needing creative students. So the slogan behind the school AI for All is AI is changing the world. Who's going to change AI? Right now, everybody in AI, they say, is male, white male with a hoodie, right? That's a typical AI researcher. And yes, how can we put more diversity, both to benefit those people that are going to come to the field, but as well to benefit the field? Do you agree with this?
Yeah, and not just demographic diversity, intellectual diversity, conceptual diversity,
Right.
contextual diversity.
So the truth is that the curricula indeed are kind of behind on this. I must say that in CMU, in my department, we have a course on AI and art, and this is because we have a wonderful professor who is married to an art professor, and they create this course. But I agree. I think what will push that direction is potentially find some applications, right, which can see it. So then if we have the final goal in mind, I mean, of course, it's not the right way to do. Usually you just invest on making the curricula marry with each other and then see what's going to come out of it. But it's good to have also a particular goal in mind that will direct that effort. But you're absolutely right. And in fact, this is exactly the push for diversity for the AI field that we are targeting.
Last week, Jeff Bezos just committed $2 billion to reinventing preschool.
Yes.
He'll be creating Montessori-style preschools, free, potentially disrupting Head Start. So he will start his talent pipeline just like Ford brought his raw materials to the factory.
Thomas had a hint on that was so interesting, and that is ask kids to solve problems, right? So we've known for a while that great science education involves problem solving, rather than lecturing so much.
So that's part of what I was saying, the problem-solving part, but also the creativity is what is the problem that you're even trying to solve? Imagine something that doesn't exist that would be really cool to have, and start from there.
And teacher training. I mean, we need to be investing in teachers, helping them have ideas and expose them to these technologies, right? I mean, I'm not the panel, but that seems an important component of this at all ages.
Yeah, I mean, this is a massive problem. I mean, you know, in the United States, primary and secondary education is ranked in the 30s in the world. It's a massive problem for our country. And we need to really fundamentally rethink how we're delivering education to children. And, you know, if we don't do that, that's going to be a big, big problem for our country and our ability to compete globally.
More questions? I've got just a couple of them.
This is a question like from research perspective. Like, is there any research going on to create to shorten the time to train like a neural network? Because like it really takes a long time to train a neural network.
No, it takes 1 hour now. In the whole image, there is a paper. Sure, you can parallelize everything and make everything super fast. Time is never an issue. In fact, this is a general principle. Takeo Kanade, who was the founding father in computer vision, and he was in CMU, he said, find the solution. Once you find the solution, the speed up will come like the next year. Does this make sense? And they're fantastic machines, TPUs. They came from Google also, that are exactly, you know, kind of GPUs for machine learning, which essentially require less, not very high precision math. So in this way, you can put more instructions on the chip and be much, much faster. So that's another hardware parallelization, let's say.
Well, I like what you mentioned. You're asking a question about education. You mentioned, Dr. Sandholm, that you can get kids to start thinking and imagining in new ways. And I think that's challenging when you think about education because we're used to teaching a lot of the same things that we've been teaching for a long time. So how do we introduce some of the concepts, some of the things that you talked about today on this panel? I'm so glad my son's here and he gets to hear about some new things that haven't existed before. And that's really powerful. He asked me a question the other day. I guess he didn't want to ask it tonight, but it actually led me to bringing him to Shady Side because I realized, okay, he's asking questions that I need to get him something better. But he asked me, he said, so I've been reading up on this AI stuff, and he said, I'm not necessarily scared of it like some prominent people have mentioned they are, but I am interested in one thing. He said, it looks like computers are going to start learning faster than humans, if they aren't already. And at some point, I'm trying to figure out what exactly makes me a human. The computer can actually start to think as fast as me or faster than me, and it can think 24 hours a day. And then it can think 1,000 times faster than me. And then we started going down some rabbit hole about what is anything really random in the world. Some people think, I don't know what it is going down the path of. So anyways, do you all ever start to think about some of those things? You mentioned some of the future, and those future kinds of things. But when computers start to think faster than humans, at some point, they're not going to actually be better than us. And then
So who wants to go first? What makes a human different from a
Shall I go first? So I think this is an excellent question. I don't have the answer, but for sure right now, I'm not interested in playing any of this chess, table tennis. Each time my husband says, let's go to play, I'm like, a robot can do that. Why should we do this? Let's go and see a movie and discuss it. And later that a computer will see a movie and be able to discuss it even further, make connections with other movies, then I'm not sure what we're going to do. But this is an excellent point. And can I tell you, it's not clear because each time we put let's say, a task, we're like, yes, it was able to play chess, but it cannot play Go. Yes, they play Go now. And yes, they play Go, but they cannot do theorem proving better than humans. Well, they can do now theorem proving, but it's just, and then, yes, they are better computationally, but emotionally they are not that great. They don't care about other people. Well, maybe there's a way to put this reward function there and then show that, yes, this kid in the class requires extra attention and be even more emotional than the teacher, right? And this takes you back to, there is this very nice book, which I don't remember how it's called, but basically show that human intelligence, what we call intelligence, is like, a bunch of many chemical processes at the end of the day. It's not something supernatural. It's not something absolutely so different that makes it discretely from. So that's a philosophical, I suppose, question, but I would say that these are beautiful questions and we think the same all the time. In fact, I always imagine that maybe in 20 years, the same way I have my students lined up, I'm also going to have little robots. They're also going to say, okay, what shall I study? Now I say, okay, focus on this and this. I'll guide them a little bit. Do you see what I mean? So the same way we teach our students, maybe, who knows? Yeah.
Anybody else want to ask anything?
Just cyborgs. That's the only one-word answer.
So I think it's really interesting. I first had this experience in the late 80s when I built a program for playing Othello that was better than me. So the moment when you build something that's more intelligent than you are, it kind of challenges you in a different way. We're always used to thinking of humans as being the smartest animal on the planet, but think about what if there's Martians that are smarter, would they come down here? We're not so special. AI, and some things, narrow things, it can be better than humans. And to me, that's not really an insult for humans. I mean, I think it just opens up a lot of potential for what humans can do.
So one or two more questions and we'll wrap up. We're running a little over right now. Right there.
I have a question for Dr. Rao, Dr. Rakibaki. Could you talk a little bit about what machine learning is never going to be good at, or at least is in the near future? So, for example, I've heard that, or for the whole panel, also robotics. Robots apparently can't hold towels very well, or machine learning in like robotic surgery is never going to be able to ask the question, like what is like the kind of the bigger planning level direction we should be taking. So ML doesn't really, it has to be told what question to solve. I think it would be interesting to hear what you guys have to say about what it's not going to do to sort of address some of these questions about where should I go, where should a child go, where should a child sort of try to think about the future place in the world. Do you understand? Yeah.
So what a machine is not going to be able to do, if you guys could hear that. What are the tasks that we hard for them that humans should? We did touch on a little bit, the kind of creative skills that humans have.
Okay, do you want me to start? So we'll start from a practical perspective. So So this is what I say in the introductory lecture of our deep reinforcement learning course. It has always been that we set the tasks that are hard for machines to be chess, AlphaGo, theory improving, difficult cognitive tasks, and they beat us, right? While if you tell a robot to do this, it's going to be so hard. Do you see what I mean? Just to manipulate. And why basic things like even very accurate visual recognition, accurate manipulation, locomotion. If the robot walks and falls, I mean, a robotic locomotion, very basic walking is not there. Does this make sense? Because we say that these tasks have been with humans for thousands of years throughout evolution. So we've been so good in seeing very well, hearing, manipulating things, manipulating tools, while the cognitive ability has always started very, very recently, a few hundred years. So we're not that good at it because we didn't have enough time to evolve these skills. So they say that, yes, mathematicians may be substitute. Sure, someone needs to ask the questions, but the cognitive abilities may be easier to substitute than a great chef that is manipulating the vegetables so well and so fast. This is going to take I think it's going to take forever to build a robotic agent that can manipulate so well vegetables. Do you see? So they say, chefs and all these people that work with fine arts are going to be harder to substitute than, let's say, potentially some. Right, so that's the other thing. Teaching the machines good reward functions. For example, how can you teach your car to drive the way you like it? Unless we teach machines human language so that we're able to say, okay, don't go that fast. Park beside that car, but leave a larger margin because I don't feel comfortable. I mean, another person may be forward, but I'm not comfortable. And if we're able to, use human language, then we'll be able to teach them reward functions or say, what, this souffle has too much salt. Next time, put less salt. So in this way, we're giving them the chance to learn fast, okay? So how do we teach them fast? So if we are able to teach them fast, they're going to get better fast. Does this make sense?
Yeah, I don't have much value to add on top of that, but maybe to restate what we were saying before, my personal take is that EQ is more valuable than CQ, like emotional quotient more valuable than creative quotient more valuable than IQ. And that the sort of jobs that involve EQ and CQ are going to be the ones that are going to be more difficult. Like emotional quotient, emotional equipoise, the ability to sort of stay even-keeled or read the room, read people, and navigate politics, relationships, like those sorts of skills, I think, are going to be much more difficult to kind of figure out. And whether it's a chef or a surgeon or like a social worker or a nurse practitioner, I mean, like those sorts of roles, I think, are really, really going to. There's going to be human roles for the foreseeable future.
I think we're done. And I have one last question for somebody who hasn't asked. I've got some of our are trying all on you. Yes, you put your hand up.
My question is on structured versus unstructured data, especially in healthcare. There is so much data available. We love structured data. There is in the medical record, easy to retrieve, easy to handle. But we as physicians like to pick up the phone and dictate, pages and pages. There are spelling mistakes, contextual mistakes, or variances. How do you deal with that when you are analyzing? Secondly, so much data is being created. The data that was created in the last 50 years, the family has created every day now across the world. Where would that data reside? How would we retrieve it when we need it? And how would we store it and safeguard it in the long run?
I mean, I'll say, like, in our business, we're in the business of taking unstructured data and turning it into structured data. And I think machine learning and natural language processing is actually quite well suited for that type of activity. Much better suited, certainly at scale, than humans are.
Right. So that's one thing. The other thing is that, I think you were talking about traditional machine learning that has this table form, and here are the observations, and each observation better have all the attributes, otherwise you have missing values, and then how your machine learning model will handle these missing values. So there are some recent techniques that don't require this table format. You can have your data in terms of a graph, and relationships, and this patient visited that clinic, then that time, and that clinic is located there. And it's all about the graph where the entities sit at the nodes, and the edges describe the relationship between nodes, and you can have triplets and quadruplets and the hierarchical graphs. And you can learn with this graph structure, which is a much more flexible, let's say, format than a table that I think you have in your mind. And yes, natural language processing will help us take those from these unstructured, semi-structured sources and depopulate that graph and then try to do learning in this graph format, let's say.
So I have one last student trying to ask a question. Hopefully I'll let you do that. And this I have a more philosophical question. So at what time do we say, like, do we feel a moral responsibility for AIs? Like, at what rate do we think that it's unjust for us to just shut down the program because we want to?
Never.
I mean, I would actually question whether humans are really good arbiters of what's moral and what's immoral. I think we have to really think about that as a society, right? I mean, who says that we're so good at knowing these things, right?
Now, I'll tell you a war story. So I actually do think that the answer is never. But I'll tell you a story about the Librato's poker playing AI, which had just beaten the top humans, and because it requires a supercomputer, we were probably not going to have it running, at least not in any foreseeable future, because it's expensive to run. And they were like, my student and I, and they were the 4 top human poker players, and we were all really sad that, okay, this thing that had been so creative and come up with all of these cool things would just cease to exist. So it did feel that way, like you're talking about, but I didn't feel any responsibility when we turned it off.
Well, I think that wraps it up. Thank you so much for great questions. Thank you, panelists.